One stormy Sunday morning, a desperate crowd filled the massive hall of Holy Ground Ministries. Whispers yelped through the rules as they raised their necks to catch sight of prophetess Adora, popularly known as Mama See-It-All. Some said she could pierce thread into a person's soul, revealing secrets no one could ever know. Others swore that she had the power to speak directly with God. But today, something unsettling hung in the air. Just then a scream echoed from the side of the hall. A lady named Patricia, one of Mama's trusted aides, rushed to the front. Wide-eyed and shaking, she did it again. Mama healed the crippled. The congregation erupted in cheer, but Elizabeth, a quiet lady who had attended for months, noticed something strange. She had seen this very crippled man walking around the market just days before. Doubt clawed at her heart. But who would believe her? Mama See-It-All was powerful and untouchable. Her followers will fight you just to protect her. Years back, Adora had been a simple girl from a humble, God-fearing family. Her parents raised her to be honest, devoted, and to walk in the ways of God. She would often lead the Sunday school, organizing prayer meetings and singing in the choir. Everyone adored her, and some even said she was destined for greatness, but no one for somehow her part will tease in such a dark direction. Years later, after struggling to build her ministry without suspect, Adora attended a grand conference for pastors. There she met several famous preachers who seemed to hold a secret power. The leader, Pastor Joseph, pulled her aside. "You are trying to be godly, but you will never make an impact until you are willing to sacrifice." He talked about a special ceremony, one that will require a significant offering from her. At first Adora hesitated, but Pastor Joseph promised her it will grant her the influence she desperately sought. Driven by her desire to succeed, she agreed. That night, she participated in a strange ritual, giving up her chance to ever have children as an offering. The pastors gathered around chanting while Adora's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. When it was over, she felt an air power settled around her like a dark cloak. She couldn't explain it, but something had changed. After returning from the conference, Adora's fortune began to shift. People started flocking to her services, and soon the entire country head of Mama See-It-All. Her church began filling up with members from every corner of Nigeria and beyond. Her fame grew, and with it her wealth, but this was only the beginning. Unknown to her followers, prophetess Adora, the woman they worshipped as Mama See-It-All, was far more than just a deceitful prophet. Beneath her human exterior lay an ancient, sinister secret. Adora was a half-human, half-serpent, a hybrid of darkness whose origin traced back to a mysterious underwater covenant she had entered after joining them. Every midnight, she would disappear from her luxurious mansion, leaving the world of mortals behind. In the dead of night, she would shed her human form and transform into a creature with skills as dark as midnight. This transformation marked her journey to the underwater kingdom where her true allegiance lay. Adora would slip silently into the river behind her mansion, vanishing beneath the waters as if swallowed by the very earth itself. There in the depth, she will join her occultic brothers and sisters, other pastors and prophets who had pledged themselves to the marine kingdom. There they shared twisted wisdom, dark strategies, and skills to keep their congregation bound in deception. For Adora, this was where she drew her power. The Marine Queen, a towing figure with serpentine features, bestowed upon her strength, vision, and the ability to see into the lives of her followers. But there was a price for this power: her soul, her humanity, and perhaps most disturbingly, her womb. Adora's sacrifice Isis to the Marine Kingdom had left her bearing a trade she had willingly made to gain authority and influence in the physical world. Back in her church, no one suspected a thing. To them, Adora was a holy prophetess, and they were oblivious of her midnight disappearances. Her congregation continued to grow as people flocked from far and wide, desperate for miracles, healing, and deliverance. Those who sought her favor were willing to pay any price, from cash offerings to livestock, and even from honorable's family. Adora's ministry had become a relentless machine, swallowing people's wealth and hopes alike. Within months, she began implementing strange new practices. Each member was handed a mirror which she called the Mirror of Life. This mirror, she will say with a commanding tone, is blessed by the Almighty Himself. Every morning look into it, speak to it, and you will see part of your spirit that needs healing. Her congregants cherished these mirrors, believing they were on a path to spiritual growth, but in reality, the mirrors were tools connected to the marine world. Through them, Mama could peer into her members' lives, studying their weaknesses, secrets, and fears. One Sunday, Mama called a young woman named Goodness to the front. Last night you argued with your husband about his job, didn't you? She said, a slight smile crossing her lips. Goodness, gasp, how did you know? The congregation erupted into a frenzy, marveling at Mama's ability to know every details of their lives in truth. She had used her mirror to summon goodness spirit in the night before, gathering all she needed to make the revelation sound divine. The church soon introduced holy water and miracle oil, bottled with simple labels but sold at exorbitant prices. Adora will wave her hands over the items, claiming that they could cure any sickness, fix any marriage, and even bring financial blessings. When Elizabeth saw a struggling mother give her last savings for a tiny bottle of miracle oil, she clenched her fist, feeling her suspicions deepened. The next Sunday, Prophet Adora's voice echoed through the church as she scanned the congregation with piercing eyes, her gaze landing on a young man seated in the middle row. His name was Kelvin, a graduate who had just come back from overseas with his mother to visit Adora's church, having heard of Mama See It All and her supposed divine revelations. They thought it was wise to seek a blessing. Adora's face lit up as she beckoned Kelvin forward. Young man, please come forward. Kelvin hesitated, but his mother nudged him, whispering, Go, this could be your blessing. As Kelvin stepped up to the front, Adora raised her hand in what looked like a gesture of divine revelation. She took a deep breath, then announced dramatically, The Lord has revealed something troubling to me. My son. The congregation was silent, hanging on every word. Adora looked at Kelvin with a heavy gaze, shaking her head slowly. Young man, your live battery is running dangerously low. I see darkness ahead, and if nothing is done. Kelvin felt his heart began to pound like life battery. He didn't understand, but he could see Adora's grave expression. He swallowed nervously. Mama, please, what does that mean? Adora placed a comforting hand on his shoulder and lowered her voice so the tension in the air thickened. It means, my son, that if something isn't done quickly, you won't live to see your 30s marriage children. All of that will be lost to you, unless you act now. Kelvin's face turned pale. His mother gasped, clutching her chest in fear, but Adora continued, raising her hand as if bestow hope on him. The Lord has provided a solution. There is a way to renew your life battery to ensure you live a long and prosperous life. She leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing with intensity. You must make a sacrifice. A powerful seed. Something that cost you deeply. For the Lord blesses those who give from the heart. Kelvin's mother held him tight, her eyes wide with worry. What kind of sacrifice, Mama? She said. Adora nodded as if she had expected the question. The Lord has directed me, she said, her voice dropping to a hush, that your son's life can be renewed with the sacrifice of a cow, not just any cow, but one that symbolizes a new life, strong, healthy, and without blemish. Kelvin stood in surprise, wondering where he could get a cow. Mama, I don't know where to get a cow now. Adora waved her hand dismissively. Do not worry, my son. The Lord understands. You need not to go out and find a cow yourself. You can simply convert this sacrifice into a seed, give the amount, and I will take care of the rest. The church has a way to handle these things. You just need to be obedient and trust in the word of the Lord. Kelvin's mother whispered frantically in his ear, urging him to comply. Kelvin, don't delay, just do what Mama See It All says. Your life is worth more than any amount of money. Reluctantly, he agreed, pulling out his checkbook and wrote a check. Adora accepted the check with a smile of satisfaction. My son, your obedience has pleased the Lord. Your life is now in God's hand, and He will reward you for your sacrifice. But still shaken, Kelvin returned to his seat, his mother clinging to him and thanking the prophets promptly. But what he didn't know was that Adora had no intention of buying any cow or offering any sacrifice, as she did with many others. She took the money straight to her ongoing project fund, adding it to the luxurious mansion she was constructing on the outskirts of town. This wasn't the first time she had used care tactics to squeeze offering from her congregation, and it wouldn't be the last. Kelvin's experience was just one of many in Adora's church. Elizabeth watched from a distance as she gathered most stories like this. She saw the pattern and knew that this prophecy were nothing more than calculated lies to drain her followers financially. She began to find a way to expose her evil doings, though she knew it wouldn't be easy. She prayed that her efforts will one day set people like Kelvin free, opening their eyes to the truth about Adora's schemes. Elizabeth's resolve strengthened, and her desire to protect innocent lives from falling into the same trap. Despite her growing doubts, Elizabeth kept attending the church quietly and observing. One faithful day at the church service, she noticed something that she couldn't ignore. An elderly man in a wheelchair rode up to the altar. Mama See It All placed her hand on his forehead, murmuring a prayer. The man suddenly stood up, shaking with supposed new strength, while the congregation erupted in joyous shouts. Elizabeth, however, recognized him from a street market. He wasn't disabled at all. He was an actor paid to pretend for this miracle over time. Adora had become one of the wealthiest women in the area, with a mansion filled with gold-plated furniture, expensive cars, and personal staff. She called it a reward from God, but Elizabeth knew that no blessing had yet arrived for her poor neighbors, who continued to give until they had nothing left. Adora wielded her power not only to deceive but to control lives, even breaking up families for her own selfish desires. She took a particular interest in wealthy, influential men who attended her church, especially those she sensed could be easily manipulated. If she set her sight on a married man, she will concoct visions and divine revelations that cast doubt upon his wife, creating chaos in the household. During one particular scandalous service, Adora singled out a successful businessman named Mr. Kingsley. She called him to the front of the congregation, dramatically raising her hand as though she's receiving divine message. "Brother Kingsley," she declared, "the Lord is showing me a troubling vision, a dark cloud surrounding your household. Someone close to you, someone you trust deeply, is working against your blessings." As expected, Mr. Kingsley looked alarmed, his eyes widened with shock and fear. "Prophets, who could it be?" he asked, desperately eager to protect his fortune and his family. Adora leaned in, lowering her voice to a solemn whisper. "It's your wife. I see her spirit entangled in the web of envy and greed blocking your breakthroughs," she added, "but fear not. Mama See It All is here to help you with my special guidance. I can break this cause over time." Adora convinced Mr. Kingsley that his wife's supposed negative energy was the reason for his business struggles. She encouraged him to distance himself emotionally, assuring him that deliverance will come if he followed her instructions. What she didn't tell Mr. Kingsley was her real motive. She intended to draw him closer to her, knowing he was vulnerable. She began sending him private messages, inviting him to special prayer sessions at her mansion, under the pretext of ping his spirit of his wife's supposed bad influence. This session, however, soon took a different turn. Adora manipulated Mr. Kingsley, feeding him with flattering words and assuring of a life filled with blessings if he would satisfy her desires. In no time, Mr. Kingsley found himself entangled in an affair with Adora, convinced that his loyalty to her would bring him divine favor. This pattern repeated with other wealthy men in the congregation. Adora sowed seeds of doubt between husbands and wives. Elizabeth, the young woman who had been investigating Patricia, grew increasingly disturbed as she learned of this manipulative tactics. This wasn't just a spiritual deception, it was a web of lies that destroyed families and tore relationships apart. Adora's actions were beyond sinful. Another unsettling practice was that Adora claimed she could bless any gallon of water, transforming it into a holy remedy for all problems, illness, financial troubles for a fee. People will leave their jerry cans of water in her office for prayers. Behind closed doors, Adora will simply pour a pack of salt and sugar into each jerry can, saying, "Now take this water home and drink from it." Each day, the salt and sugar created a slight change in taste, fing congregants into believing the water was truly blessed. One evening, Elizabeth overheard a conversation between two of Adora's closest aides, Daniel and Joy, discussing the gerund tricks. "Can you believe they are paying that much just for a dash of salt and sugar?" Linda laughed, shaking her head. Elizabeth felt a surge of fear but stood her ground, her heart filled with the courage to see her mission true. She knew Adora's days of deception were numbered. The truth was out there, ready to be revealed, and there was no turning back now. Another faithful night, driven by a mixture of curiosity and courage, Elizabeth decided to follow Adora. She waited in the bush near the river behind Adora's mansion, clutching her phone tightly, hoping to capture whatever dark secret lay hidden. The clock struck midnight. Elizabeth saw Adora emerge from her mansion. She moved gracefully towards the river, her steps almost gliding across the ground. Elizabeth's heart raced as she watched Adora at the river bend. The prophets looked up at the sky and began chanting in a strange language, one that sounded ancient and unsettling. Then, before Elizabeth's very eyes, Adora's form began to change. Her skin shimmered and scales emerged, covering her body. As her legs melded together, her eyes glowed as she slid silently into the water, disappearing beneath the surface with a splash. Elizabeth gasped, barely able to process what she had seen. She realized then that Adora was not just a fraud, she was something beyond human. Elizabeth stumbled back, her mind racing. This truth was more terrifying than she could ever imagined. Adora wasn't merely deceiving her congregation. She was manipulating them with powers that stained from the depth of a dark occultic world. The next morning, Elizabeth returned to the church, her spirit heavy but resolved. She knew now that her mission was not just to reveal Adora's fraudulent practices but to expose the dangerous forces she was harnessing. But Adora, aware of Elizabeth's growing suspicion, took notes. Her piercing gaze lingered on Elizabeth during this service, her smile as sharp as a blade during the altar call. That day Adora announced that she had a special blessing for one person in the congregation who was called to serve a divine mission. She fixed her gaze on Elizabeth, who froze as Adora called her forward. Elizabeth, come forward. Adora's voice was smooth but laced with an undertone of menace. The Lord has shown me that you carry a heavy burden. Come, let Mama see it, I'll lift it from you. Elizabeth's heart pounded, but she stepped forward, not wanting to reveal her fear, as Adora laid a cold hand on her forehead. Elizabeth felt a chilling sensation run through her body. She heard Adora whisper in her ear, "You are trading on a dangerous waters, my child. Be careful, for some secret are not meant to be uncovered." Elizabeth swallowed hard but refused to back down. She would continue her mission to expose Adora, but she now knew the stakes were higher than she had imagined. There was no turning back now. Elizabeth